what I've done for several of my clients is to break down for them, let's look at the Wente playbook, or let's look at the Wolfer Estate playbook, and what types of ideas might be most appropriate for your brand based on what they're doing. And really the idea of that is just to do thought starter, right? So my recommendation really for any brand is to go look at all of their social channels, go look at their marketing materials, sign up for their newsletter, understand these are the tactics that are working in the American market, and then try to back out from those to understand what could be applicable to your own brand.
Welcome to another episode of On the Road Edition, hosted by Stevie Kim. Each week, Stevie travels to incredible wine destinations, interviewing some of the Italian wine scene's most interesting personalities, talking about wines, the foods, as well as the incredible travel destinations.
Oh my God.
Yay! I think it was the app update.
Yeah, so you I guess it's been a while, but I thank God you're alive.
Yay!
A bunch of people are saying Happy New Year. So this is a Happy New Year, finally. Forbes magazine dropped an article yesterday, bylined, of course, Erica Duecy. And so we said, why don't we have a chat with her today, which is New Year's Eve? What are your plans for New Year's Eve?
Yeah, so we're going to a steakhouse in New York for a dinner with me, my husband, and my kids. That's like kind of a tradition that we have.
Okay.
Some nice Manhattans and a big juicy steak.
Okay, nice. How old are your kids?
I have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old.
Okay, so today we're chatting with Erica Duecy. You wear many different hats, but I know you mostly as the wine journalist and a fellow podcaster.
Yep.
And author of a recent Forbes article, actually yesterday, Where Wine Won in 2025, and what the growth signals are telling us. So there's been a lot of noise about wine decline, right? And I love this article because you give a kind of a different perspective. So I wanted to focus on what is really working in your opinion, what the signals are. And of course, this is the Italian Wine Podcast. So this means for Italian wine stateside. We'll do a little bit of podcasting too. Okay, so everyone keeps saying wine is in trouble. Like that's kind of the thing, right? Everyone is saying that. Yeah. From your point of view, according to your also article, where did wine actually win in the US for 2025?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on. Always so fun to chat with you and everyone at Italian Wine Podcast. You know, like you said, the entire narrative around wine for 2025 was all around the decline. But that's not what I saw when I looked at the data, right? So there was real growth in wine in 2025, but it was just concentrated in certain pockets. So in the data analysis that I do, I work with a lot of brands and I do advising, and I help brands understand where are the pockets of growth coming from. And for whatever reason, that doesn't get a lot of coverage in the media. So I kind of broke it out into 4 different sections. And really, in the traditional wines, meaning like the 750 mLs, Italian producers, international producers, where the biggest wins were this year were really in space of whites. So white blends were a huge winner this year, growing double digits in some areas. You know, we saw a huge splashy launch of Josh Sea Swept, which was this white blend that was really marketed towards millennials and Gen Zs, and showing that kind of white blends are the thing that you want to drink at, you know, Coachella and Outside Lands and all of these high energy festivals. So that kind of led the way into a growth story around what was happening in whites. Sauvignon Blanc had a good year. Chenin Blanc had a fantastic year. And we saw a ton of new entrants in the Chenin Blanc space because these whites and sort of what we would call like the alternative whites are really having a lot of growth. So whites, alternative whites, and white blends, that was really the high spot for whites. And then moving on, we saw a lot of growth also in sparkling wine. but it was really sparkling wine over $15. So, the La Marcas, the Mianettos, the Veuve Clicquots, they all saw growth this year, where many other brands in the sparkling space saw decline. So I think, the premium level for whites really was a leader there. And then when you look at rosés, premium rosé also grew despite an overall category decline. So the Whispering Angels, Minuti, Wolfer, Summer in a Bottle, all those brands saw growth. So that was kind of section one, what was happening in traditional wines. Mm-hmm. Then you go to section two, which is really about product innovation. So what was the product innovations that we were seeing? And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I come upon from people in the industry is that product innovation is cannibalizing the core. But at this point, we've seen so much data to indicate that that's not the case, right? These are additive occasions. So the single serve products, such as the beat boxes, which are those wine-based party punches, or canned wines, right? Those are growing the base overall because they're playing in places that traditional wine has not, right? Concerts, airlines, like travel lounges, like all these sorts of places that single serve really needs to be the dominant format for a variety of reasons. So those are some of the innovations that we saw there. And then also non-alcoholic wine, right? A lot of people say like, oh, isn't non-alcoholic wine, taking away from alcoholic wine? But that's not what the data indicates. So, we have a huge brand like Trinchero Family Estates that has a product called Free, F-R-E, and that product has about almost nearly 50% of the NA market in the US for wine. But, they're a huge portfolio with, 80 different brands. And so the question they get from a lot of traditional wine brands is, aren't you cannibalizing sales? But again, that's not what the data indicates. The data indicates that either lower alcohol, better for you wines or non-alcoholic wines are providing more occasions, and they're keeping wine in the conversation and in the traditional occasions like the after work, after dinner occasion, where maybe on a Tuesday or Wednesday, wine is not going to play, right? So it's really providing a way for wine to stay in the conversation, in the ritual, in the occasions where it always has been, but really adapting the product to people's lifestyles. So those have been some of the innovations in kind of this, product innovation set, as I would call it. And then the third space that I talked about was really marketing, right? And marketing for the way people live now. So the brands that really outperformed and saw growth this year, they were embracing personality, culture, showing how they were relevant to people's lives, not just showing, scores and formal tasting occasions, but really, wine on the golf course, wine in unexpected places that you wouldn't be thinking of having it, like, at a concert, on the lawn, with friends, sort of thing. So I think that that is an interesting area for people to think about, because I have a couple of case studies in there, like Wolfer Estate and Wente Family Vineyards, where they talked about, not increasing their marketing budgets, but reallocating their budgets from places that were less effective from an ROI standpoint, right? So Wente, for example, they talked about having, $500,000 dedicated to this point of sale material that they would just send to distributors. And they didn't even know if that was being executed. So they changed the strategy, reallocated that spend to social media channels, to other places where the digital sort of, content and whatnot could be tracked. There's some sort of reallocation that takes place. And then what do you do when that reallocation has taken place? Well, having those conversations, having people from the family or from whatever your brand structure is, having people from the actual winery in the images, in the videos, because I think we can all agree at this point that we are living in a personality-driven world, right? You need look no farther than like the Elon Musks and the Richard Bransons of the world to understand that that is the type of marketing that works. And so kind of the days of...
It's a little bit sad, though.
It's a little bit sad, but it's so true, and like the days of just like showing up on social media with bottle shots and vineyard shots are really over. What people are looking to connect with for brands is really the people behind the brands or whoever the spokespeople are, what have you. So I think it's really thinking through, are we effectively using our channels to reach various audiences? And what worked for boomer audiences is not the same as what worked for younger audiences. So there's a whole section and some case studies in there talking about that. And then the last section of the article really focused on channel strategy as a growth lever. So this is really about where wine shows up. And, I already tipped to the idea of, arenas and concert venues and all of these places like ski slopes, right? Where wine traditionally has not had a major presence. And that's where the biggest wins were this year. So, probably the largest brands in the space doing this would be like Barefoot, right? Barefoot, fascinatingly, has data showing that over the past couple of years, their partnership with the NFL has brought more than 4 million new consumers.
I read that.
To
That's
wine.
absolutely mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling. And that actually is what needs to be happening with wine right now. We need to be finding new occasions for wine to grow because we have this leaky bucket problem. And what that means is, wine adds, a certain percentage of new drinkers every year, but then loses more than it adds, right? So there's this leaky bucket problem with wine. And the brands who are really taking a front seat, aggressive approach of going after these types of new places for wine, those are the ones that are showing outsized growth in the entire category. So there's a lot of examples of that and of brands that are also using by the glass programs, very aggressively pricing their wines for by the glass to, grow there, using travel venues like airport lounges to grow their presence. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for wine. And the thing that I wanted to bring to the table was really, what are the proven growth strategies that actually worked this year in this current climate that we're in, and then understand how can other brands potentially use those insights to grow their own brands.
So, in the article, you said you interviewed more than 100 people, right, in the wine industry and wine professionals. But I have a feeling that the people you spoke to mostly were rather large company affiliated wine people. Is that correct? Is that safe to say?
No. I mean, the people that we interview on the podcast are 10,000 cases or above. So, 10 I
Okay,
guess
so
it's
you have
relative.
that.
A lot of
Okay.
brands are 1,000,000 cases, but a lot of them are also 10,000 cases.
Okay. Because I was thinking like maybe for them the strategies would be different. I don't know. That's just, it's very
definitely.
superficial because like, Kendall Jackson, right? Like, I mean, in order for them to attract 4 million additional consumers, I haven't a clue how much they're investing in terms of advertising. Right?
Yeah, it would be safe to say millions. But we've seen this strategy work in other sectors of the drink space. So, for example, there's a lot of energy brands and a lot of RTDs now that are partnering with very small scale. So, like, on the one hand, we have the NFLs and the NBAs, right? Those are the huge budgets. But what's also working on the other side for smaller brands is, there's so many places that you can plug in. Think about all the pickleball tournaments and leagues that are out there, the running clubs, the yoga clubs, like all these sorts of places where you can actually sponsor or be affiliated with these types of, brands or companies that are doing activations and getting your brand in front of their audiences. So I think that's kind of the bottom line there of, there are ways to plug in. I think one of the smartest brand strategies that I saw this year was from Dessois, which is a kind of like a non-alcoholic spritz brand.
Right.
And they did this really smart strategy that I'm seeing more and more, which is partnering with actual like Pilates studios or spin studios, right? And having a can of, their product with like a cute little bag at those actual places, because these are places that people are paying $50 to go into the studio and do their spin class. These are ride or die physical spaces with audiences that really listen to what their instructors and coaches are saying. So if these new products are affiliated with those places, it really has a lot of weight. So I've actually seen some of these smaller brands spend from kind of digital influencers to IRL influencers. And the IRL influencers tend to be those brands that have physical spaces. There's a coffee shop up the street from me that does all of these sorts of collaborations with other drinks brands, or they even did like a Snickers brand latte recently, where it was just Snickers was showing up, taking this strategy and showing up in those places. Because the thing that I think is genius is you can both have a sampling occasion and then have a QR code that people can scan to see where is this product available in a store within 5 miles, right? So like it brings it full circle. It's not just sort of diffuse in the digital, ecosystem, but it really is, bringing it back full circle to that actual spend. Where can I find this product that you're trying to sell me within 5 miles of my spin, class? So I think that is a kind of next level innovation that more and more brands are starting to take advantage of.
So, I mean, I have to bring it a little bit back to Italian wine. Okay.
Yeah.
So, from your perspective, in your opinion, from, I guess, as an American, what do Italian producers still misunderstand about, quote unquote, the American consumer, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest challenge for not just Italian brands, but really a lot of brands across the ecosystem, what I'm seeing is, you have these very sophisticated brands like the Kendall Jacksons and the Barefoots that have a ton of data. They really understand. They're more run like CPG companies than they
Yeah,
are
exactly.
like
Yeah.
wine brands, right?
hmm
And then at the bottom end, you have very personality driven individual wine brands, from kind of very passionate producers. But there's this middle tier, right? And this middle tier of brands really has a challenge understanding how to plug into marketing that is effective, making very good use of their marketing dollars at whatever type of spend we're talking about, whether it's $20,000 a year or $200,000 a year. So from my perspective, brands really need to be thinking about that marketing strategy and looking at what are other brands that are performing well in the United States, meaning they're growing. What are they doing specifically that is working for them? And what insights can I take from that? So I would go back to the Wente and Wolfer Estate examples. These are two brands that are, in the sort of middle tier, but they're at the higher end of that. And the thing that they have done so effectively is really reach people in the places that they are, right? So, for example, Wente brings in influencers from very diverse backgrounds to their wineries to really expand and open the umbrella of wine much
So, like
wider,
even
right?
micro influencers, right? Like
Exactly.
smaller
Micro
ones.
influencers, right? So you're essentially like filtering out where is the brand present and to whom. So broader and broader exposure. So for example, Wolfer Estate did this really fun rosé collaboration with a regional ice cream company. So it was rosé sorbet with Wolfer Estate Summer in the Bottle, right? And it's really only a brand that you would find in the East Coast and New York area. But that brought an entire new audience to them that may not ever have had been familiar with the Wolfer brand. So I think it's like finding those types of partnerships, finding those types of activations that make your brand feel relevant. And you are showing up in places where people already live their lives, right? So like you go to the ice cream store and you're like suddenly curious. And that's one way for you to interact with this brand. Or the makeup collaboration or whatever it is that is like helping you as a brand become more relevant to people in their everyday lives. So what I've done for several of my clients is to break down for them, let's look at the Wente playbook, or let's look at the Wolfer Estate playbook, and what types of ideas might be most appropriate for your brand based on what they're doing. And really the idea of that is just to do thought starter, right? So my recommendation really for any brand is to go look at all of their social channels, go look at their marketing materials, sign up for their newsletter, understand these are the tactics that are working in the American market, and then try to back out from those to understand what could be applicable to your own brand.
So, I mean, switching to your podcaster hat for 1 nanosecond,
Yeah.
what makes someone a great podcast guest in wine for your podcast,
Yeah. So for our podcast, really, we're looking at growth stories, and we really are all about finding the bright spots in
Mm-hmm.
not just wine, but across all drinks categories. And, our idea really is that the best ideas might be coming from not your direct competitors, but from other areas of the drinks industry. So, we're focusing on growth stories across all of drinks. And I think what makes someone a really good guest for us is if they have a clear understanding of what drove growth for them specifically. So, what types of programs or activations or strategies were they using to unlock growth at different levels? And then being able to articulate what those were. And we also we share a lot of data. We do a lot of analysis of drinks reports. So we're constantly looking to understand who are the people and brands that are unlocking the most growth in a given category, and then deep diving into those to understand, basically to help brands. Our goal is to help brands understand what are the growth levers that they might be able to access to have unlocks for their own brands.
So I know you do a weekly show, right?
Yeah.
Like every week?
Mm-hmm. We have we have an episode today
Right.
going live that just went live, and it's really about not just wine. My article was specifically about wine, but it's across the entire drinks industry. What were the brightest spots? Where was growth unlocked? And I think that's, it's very instructive from us because we do a lot of public speaking as well as advising, just to really have our kind of finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry and who is winning, and then understanding why, and kind of triangulating back from that to help brands understand at any stage, whether they've got $1 million spend or $1,000 spend, how best to use that money.
So I guess, doing a weekly podcast means you've had 50 plus episodes in 2025.
Yeah.
And the last episode is today. But is there like one interview that really genuinely changed how you think about the future of wine this year?
Yeah, I think Jen Pilka from Unfem Wines, right?
Okay.
So if you don't know her story, she had a really super fun sparkling wine bar in San Francisco and in New York called the Riddler. And she had a house sparkling wine, rather. It was a California-based sparkling wine. So COVID hits, she has to close down her entire operation. And she has this tiny little house brand, right? This house sparkling wine. And she says, maybe we should lean into this. We have sort of no other options here. So we have this house sparkling wine. Let's see what happens. So she starts marketing it and trying to, get it on retail shelves and picked up through distribution and whatnot. And there's a chance meeting with Delta Airlines. And Delta Airlines says, oh, this is such a fun brand. We see that you have these little minis, these little champagne minis, which were glass. So let's give those a try on our airlines. Let's do a little pilot program, because Unfem, one of their unlocks was that their brand donates back to women's charities. So there actually was a tie back to a breast cancer charity, right? So they do the trial. It's a couple months trial. And at the end of that trial, they say to Jen, hey, you know what? Glass is actually not recyclable throughout the United States and throughout our systems, but aluminum is. So would you ever consider doing a canned wine? And Jen Pelka at this point, and this is later on in the pandemic in maybe 2021, she says, I've never even had a canned wine. She has specialized in fine wine her entire career.
Right.
And she says, you know what? We'll give it a shot. So she has to essentially turn this tiny little production into a huge, they have to quadruple their volume of output in 3 months in a new format, right? A lot of people would have said, we don't do that. I
Yeah.
can't do that. But she said yes, right? And that led to her brand. This year, they did more than 300,000 cases
Holy
of
crap.
canned sparkling wine, not just in Delta Airlines, but in all the ski resorts, in the movie theaters, in the arenas, in places where 750 mLs cannot, for a variety of operational reasons, exist. So that type of saying yes when opportunities arise, I think that is what was the through line for the smaller brands that we talked with this year. We talked with the founder of Field Recordings. That's about a 50,000 case brand. Where did he say yes? It was to private label. And now he is making, orange wines for Whole Foods, right? Like the
Right, right.
brands that grew said yes to opportunities that maybe were not on their vision board, but were opportunities that presented themselves because they paid attention to where demand was building. And I think that's really the unlock right now for a lot of wine brands, is to keep those feelers out and be open to maybe a new direction if the direction you're currently, focused on is hitting a standstill. So those opportunities and being in a position to say yes when they happen really can be transformative.
Yeah, it's kind of a unicorn story, though, right? I mean, it
No,
doesn't
there's
happen every day. Like, I
well,
mean,
I
a
don't think it
small,
happens every day.
small
Yeah.
champagne, like in a sparkling wine,
Yeah.
mini size, and then a supplier, like a client, asks them to completely repackage and do something else, right? And of
Yeah.
course, she was brave enough to say yes, but yeah, it's sometimes you have to things happen for a reason.
Yeah,
Great
definitely.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, that was one of the big ones that I really, enjoyed this year. But I think any of these stories where brands are, taking chances and trying new things, because for a lot of brands, the things that worked before 5 years ago even don't work now. And that's
Yeah.
just because of demographic shifts, right? The way that younger people are shopping and imbibing is a lot different than it was for baby boomer generations. So really understanding, we can't just rely on what was our playbook 5 years ago to have the same dividends now that it did then. And that's what a lot of the work I do is just
Mm-hmm.
helping to identify those growth stories so that brands can figure out how to fit themselves into the new framework for growth.
So, yeah, so before we close, I know you're not Nostradamus, but looking ahead, 2026, what should producers and importers really be paying attention to?
I think format is really a big opportunity. And, I talk to a lot of producers who just say the quality is not good. I disagree with that. I disagree with
Mm-hmm.
that. Like at this point, there have been so many canned wines on the market, and there are entire departments at Cornell and at other universities dedicated to finding and, developing the right type of liners in the cans to provide high quality cans. There's so many different technological advances that have taken place over the past couple of years to really enable cans to be a very high quality product. So I think cans, maybe if cans aren't right for you, try half bottles, right? So
Right.
there was double digit growth for so many brands, probably more than a dozen brands that I saw had had double digit growth in their half bottles. So there's a lot of opportunity in format, also boxed wine. So that I think is definitely an area. Also, one of the things for traditional wineries that I keep coming back to is, if you only have red wines, consider offering a white, right?
Yeah.
And I think the best example of this was Gaia. So I was at the opening of their new white wine winery in the Alta Longa
Mm-hmm.
in October. And Gaia is a producer that, really up until this point has had two white wine, maybe three white wine SKUs, but mostly is known for its Barbarescos. And they saw, I think, they had the Nostradamus like vision to
Yes, of course,
invest.
Angelo, yes.
Exactly. They had the vision to invest in white wine. Now they've developed this new white wine winery that will be producing 350,000 bottles a year. That's like 41,000 cases. And those products are all going to be just as premium as their current offerings. So those are going to be $100 plus white wines, right?
Yeah.
So I think they really saw the writing on the wall with climate change, with where demand is building from a consumer standpoint, probably some price variability in there, like wanting to, have some kind of lower end, even for them, for them, $100 bottle is a
Yep.
lower end bottle. But I think that they really were kind of visionary in this way of saying, this is where we see opportunity happening, and this is where we may be able to find growth for our own brand in the years to come. So, I wrote another article about this particular winery, the Alta Longa Winery in Forbes. So for people who are interested in reading more about it, there's a huge amount of detail in that article.
Great.
And like what they were thinking about as they went through that process.
Okay, well, we'll be looking forward to that. Erica, we are so great to have you this New Year's Eve special. It's been a great reality check, I would say, on the US market, and kind of a fun podcaster to podcaster conversation, if you will. And thank you above all for helping us kind of like, when there's so much noise, right? It's difficult to focus on what actually matters. So you kind of gave us a little bit of a guideline today. And there's nothing else to say except Happy New Year.
And thank you so much. Yes, I'm glad that we were able to get on.
Yeah.
Happiest of New Year's to you. And looking
and hopefully you
to...
can. What would be interesting is to get you on Wine to Wine next year. It'll be in October. So by that time, we'll see if your vision of the new formats, different formats, comes to a form, different shape and form.
Love it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stevie.
All right.
Take care.
Ciao. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of On the Road Edition, hosted by Stevie Kim. Join her again next week for more interesting content on the Italian wine scene. You can also find us at ItalianWinePodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. You can check out our YouTube channel, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, to watch these interviews and the footage captured at each location. Chin chin!